Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we have Pat with us for the third interview. And Pat is a scientist, senior scientist, I must say, for AstraZeneca. And during the first interview, Pat told us about his PhD and why he left academia. Then during the second interview, Pat told us about his current role, day-to-day life in AstraZeneca as a senior scientist. And honestly, the job sounded great to me, and I would love to do it myself. So, Pat, if you're hiring one day, let me know. And then today, let's talk about recruitment and interview process. For a scientist role, in big pharma or in general, I suppose. So, Pat, again, thank you so much for being here with us today and let's crack on. So, Pat, how did you find the role that you have right now? So, did you find it on LinkedIn, or what was the process?
So the role I have at the moment, I lucked out. I will admit, I kind of lucked out because it was a weird crossover situation. Essentially, a master student did their industrial placement in the laboratory, had some experience, and then decided, you know what, I want to do a PhD. And so they looked for a PhD, and then ended up in our laboratory where I was finishing my PhD. I started talking with them, and they told me about this really interesting group down in Cambridge that does this work in sort of like gene editing and in cells. And I thought that'd be interesting. I'm intrigued. I want to try it out. So I looked them up online. I found the job advertised on LinkedIn as well, and I thought, you know what, I'll give it a shot. What's the worst that could happen? And so I applied.
Brilliant. So, okay. So let's start from the beginning. So what did you put in your CV, and did you also have a cover letter? And what was it that you think made you stand out during the selection process?
So I will say that the question of the cover letter is always a bit suspicious because some people are for it, some people are against it. I am still in the camp of including it because even though it's a lot of text and even though some recruiters won't read it, it's a sort of a nice gesture. And so if you do include it, it's great. And if you don't, and if they are looking for it and you don't include it, that's a bit of a negative. So it's just increasing your chances of being hired. As for what I actually put into mine, I must say that I read the job description very, very carefully, and I wrote it again and rewrote it again and again and again. Essentially, I was trying to pick up on those like small things. What is behind the job ad? And now that I'm actually in industry, now that I'm a senior scientist, I see the other side of the job ad and I realize what was asked for. When somebody says experience in cell culture, they're not interested in this particular cell that we are working with. No, no, no. What we're looking for is somebody who can do a aseptic technique, who can just pipette accurately, who knows that cell culture is done in, for example, in laminar flow hoods, the sort of small bits that are around it, almost like meta knowledge, like meta skills, not
Mm.
the actual precise skill. And I think that's what got me through because I was thinking, what are they interested in? How can I sell myself for the job ad?
Right, so it's the bigger picture, isn't it? Rather than the nitty-gritty detail that we were after.
100%. I would fully agree with that because recently we had some job applications where I noted that some participants said, yes, I have cultured, for example, HEC293 cells. Great. That's a great skill set. But is it just HEC293 cells? What if we move to a different cell type? What if it's a different cell line? Whilst at the same time, we have another applicant who said, I'm knowledgeable in aseptic mammalian cell culture. Boom,
Mm.
that's already solved because I know for a fact they know what a mammalian cell is and they probably have expertise on a few different cell lines. And that already gives me more confidence in that applicant. And I'm saying this because notice how one of them is very precise, the other one is just slightly vague, and it's still the same skill set, but I'm much more confident in the other one because I know that they have the meta knowledge, the things around it that are required.
Mm. That's such a good point. I really like this part. Okay. Um, so essentially, think what is the actual business need behind the job advert, and then recognize the fact that we're asking you to work with them for long term. So you might be working with this particular cell line or technique today, but the project will change in 12 months' time, let's say. Um, and you'll need to be, you need to be versatile and be able to work, you know, apply maybe the same technique in a very different setting. So they're looking for that flexibility and an open approach.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely agree with that. It's just that I find that you need to be able to find a sort of meeting point between what the job ad wants. As an example, culture is X cell, and you have cultures Y cell. So where does this meet together? Because that's the best chance for you to present yourself in the best light and also present the skills that the job or the company or the employer really wants to find. I think that meeting ground is where you need to how to sell yourself and also read the job ad.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay. Okay. That makes absolute sense. So then you sent your CV, your cover letter, and then what was the recruitment process like? Did they call you immediately or a bit later? And what happened?
So here I'll say that I find it quite interesting in the sort of like the recruitment process definitely changes the higher the seniority level goes. And I find that it might be discouraging because when you're applying for scientist or senior scientist positions, that works beautifully because you probably are going to get a response within a week, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and that's fine. If you don't get a response from the company in those timelines, mind you, this is nowadays, maybe in the future, in 10 years' time, this will change. But at the moment, if you don't get the response, you are probably being kept as a backup in case somebody else falls out. But
Yeah.
it doesn't bode well. It doesn't show as in a good light. Nothing to say about you as a person. I'd rather, when you have 20 people, you have to select somebody who's the best fitting. You might have the second and the third best candidates still as a backup, but you will not answer them yes or no immediately. So that's why the delay. So the longer it takes for a company to answer, often the less of a chance to get in, sadly.
Sure, absolutely. But then, the flip side of this, I would assume, is that the reason why they are getting back to you because the first choice and maybe second choice as well said no. So if they are
Yes, true. But at the same
yeah.
time, if you have the sort of radio silence, then you don't know, are they going to say no once they confirm the first candidate? Or will they invite you for an interview once the first candidate says no as well? So basically, if they already have somebody for the role, they will say to you a polite message saying, sadly, we found somebody else who fits the role a bit better, and that's fine. But it's that sort of, should I put it, the purgatory zone where you're waiting for like 3, 4, or
Mm,
5 weeks, waiting for that answer. And I think the best remedy to that, what I found from personal experience is, well, don't apply to just one role. Yes, there are jobs that you really want to do, but that doesn't mean you have to do it in company A. You can do it in company B, C, and D, and all the way down. And so in the end, change the game, make it that you choose the job role, not the other way around. So apply
mm,
for more positions and give yourself the sort of mental freedom to do it.
of course. So, on that note, how many positions did you apply for, Pat? And, how many interviews did you actually get? Like, do you remember?
So getting interviews, I must admit, getting interviews was a little bit more challenging. So I remember, I think I applied for 20 positions initially, just sent out just applications to those.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect my memory might be fading because this was 3 years ago, but I think I got 3 interviews, and this
Mm,
one was a successful one where I'm currently be at.
yeah, yeah. No, to be fair, this is still really good odds, for um, 3 interviews out of 20 applications. So how did you select the roles you applied for? Were they all sort of scientist positions that were very closely matched to your experience, or what was it that made you apply
So
for these roles?
the way I selected positions, was actually based about, I used primarily LinkedIn and other like job search engines, and I looked for scientist positions or keywords, gene editing or molecular biology. I was looking for these key phrases. And then I told myself, because after the PhD, I had plenty of free time, I said, okay, every day I'm going to spend 2 hours on this sort of job hunt. Just scroll through the list, read the job titles, all that. Maybe apply for one per day. So sort of like keep the machine going, because you have to understand that when you're applying, it's not just your skill set that you're selling, but you're also sharpening your skills to sell your skills. You're sharpening your interview knowledge, you're sharpening your CV
Definitely.
writing knowledge. So you have to keep the machine going, because if you say write 50 applications in one day and then say, yep, jobs are good and now just wait for it, that's not going to bode well. But if you keep at it, that actually is a lot, not only healthier for you because it's less stressful, but also it gives you higher chances of being hired.
Yes, absolutely. It's you're getting better at being interviewed essentially, and you understand the process, the game better. Um, and yeah, I think you did very, very well. And I actually told this to people a few episodes back that you should really only apply for roles that you closely match. Um, and um, and just don't feel negative about rejections, because we are absolutely normal part of the process. And unfortunately, um, it doesn't really say anything about you or your skill set. It's just what it says is that um, they're looking for someone else with a better fit for the role, someone with maybe a little bit of experience in this particular technique than you have. And that's okay, but there will be a different role clearly. 19 other companies didn't want you, but a multi-billion pharma company said yes to you. Does this say anything, about the previous companies? Were they, in the wrong when they rejected your application? Probably not. Probably you just didn't fit what we were looking for.
100% agree. Not only that, having been on the other side of the recruitment process, I know that the current phenomenon is a sort of grade inflation where you need to be with 50 years of experience to apply for a junior role. Sadly, that's where we're at. And because of that, a lot of the candidates will come in with similar skill set to yours. Some of them will be even higher than yours. So in no way, shape, or form is the letter saying no, that you're wrong, that your skill set is insufficient. No, it's not that your skill set is insufficient. It's just somebody that had more experience came in. As an example, we recently had years of experience in that role. So it doesn't matter if you have like the perfect skill set, if you can culture those cells perfectly. If somebody has 12 years of experience doing that, they will get chosen for the role.
And sadly, it makes sense, doesn't it? Mm. Right. Okay. So let's go back to your CV then. And do you think there was anything in your CV that made you stand out from other
Yes,
candidates?
so I will say that I always applied I applied the same principle to the CV that I applied to my slides, to my presentations, to my lectures, which is I talk a lot myself, but my slides are minimal and to the point.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the same about the CV. I've seen many CVs in my life that have good descriptions, that have very good writing, but I made my CV very bland in that sense. I said, for example, fluent in English and then Lithuanian, and then, for example, learning Italian. And that's it. I didn't say that, I'm a beginner level in speaking, but writing is that. No, no, just summarize key points.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same about skill set as well. I said my education, just PhD from this university and this year, and master's from this university this year. You don't really want to flesh out into that further, because if you think about it, you are a person who just finished university, you're applying for a job role. How do you stand out? I've cultured ye cells, but then it's only one practical for probably 3 hours. That didn't give you enough of a skill set. No, just say that I have cultured ye cells. That's it. The sort of key phrase there allows me to know, okay, you know what it is. You probably need more experience in it, but you at least know what it means to culture yeast cells. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what stands out. So I think make it short and to the point. That's the key thing about CVs.
Sure. Sure. I think that's a good advice, definitely, especially because recruiters don't have much time, do they? They will look at your CV for 10 seconds and decide whether you are a yes or you're a no person for them, unfortunately. Okay, so uh,
100%. I remember even seeing scary statistic that on average is like 8 seconds, I think. It's just terrifying how your whole life, your whole knowledge, the thing you fought for, just 8 seconds and done. Next one.
Exactly. So your key skill sets need to be out visible, screaming at them, saying, yes, I can do this, I can do the job. Absolutely, yeah.
100%.
So, okay, so you said your CV, your cover letter, and then what happened later? So I would assume someone from HR called you and you had a little short interview with them first before you had an interview with the hiring manager. If you could tell us a little bit more about this.
Certainly. So, as I mentioned previously, I only had like 3 interviews, so I don't have a lot of experience, but I can tell you from the minimal experience I had how it goes. So, as you rightfully said, usually are contacted by the person from HR who will tell you, well, we saw your CV, we are interested in contacting you further. Can we arrange an interview and would you be interested in this role? And it usually is either very quick, like a 5-minute phone call, or sometimes just an email just to confirm it. And they work out the timings when to have an interview with you. Now, here I'll have to say it's very mean, but you need to be a bit flexible, because what essentially happens is that the HR person, for example, your future manager, maybe the team's boss or a director or somebody higher in the industry, they will come together and have that meeting, and they will have several candidates to interview. So they might have odd times. Sometimes they'll have like at 12 o'clock during lunchtime an interview. Sometimes they'll ask you to show up for the interview at 10 a.m., sometimes even at 4 in the afternoon. So it is difficult. And here I don't have an easy answer. You need the flexibility to be able to do those interviews.
So what kind of questions could people expect? And, did they ask you to do any tasks as well?
They didn't ask me to do any tasks, but they did ask a lot of like the first half was soft skills, the second half was hard technical skills, and the last bit was the sort of personal skills. So that structure might vary, but these are the sort of 3 key bits that I would isolate. And I would say if you want to stand out at this stage of the interview and they're asking you the sort of skill set about yourself, always try to apply those interview models. Now, some of your listeners might know about the Atola model, or some of them might know about the STAR model.
Mm-hmm.
It's about like situation, tasks,
Action,
then answers,
result.
then yes. So they're sort of slowly structuring your answer. And I would highly, highly recommend it. I'll repeat myself, highly recommend it. Gather a bunch of your friends. Get your parents, get your friends, get your fellow colleagues from their current workplace, or even your fellow PhD students, and just have a mock interview. Interview questions are not really about the answer, more about how you carry yourself. What I mean by
Mm,
that is, if you have at the back of your head that sort of, okay, all right, I have no clue how to answer this, but let's break it down. What was the problem? How did I solve it? What is the solution? If you have that in your head, you will nail it. And also, if you practice the interview, you'll feel a lot more calm. You'll expect those questions, and they won't be able to surprise you. And that definitely helps. Does improve your employability from the employer's perspective.
yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I used STAR method in my own interviews. And I think um, it is absolutely key to all of the soft skill questions, essentially. Um, but also, Pat, so what would you say was more important, the soft skills or the hard skills, the technical skills during your interview?
Definitely the soft skills.
Mm,
Now, of course, if you're asked 10 hard skills questions and you fail to answer all 10, well, it's not going to bode well. But if you say, I'm apologize, but I don't know about this particular bit, that's fine. That's actually not a problem. I mentioned it in our previous interviews, but what I'm mostly intrigued in a potential employee is the desire to learn the sort of soft skills. How do you approach a problem that you never solved before? How do you proceed if there's an issue with the protocol? Can you challenge seniority on a particular problem or an issue that you think needs to be fixed? These sort of soft skills to be able to persevere, to continue with the problem, to be able to break it down, and that will definitely go forward. So I think soft skills are definitely more important than hard skills.
sure. And also, hard skills is something they can teach you. Soft skills they can't. Mm,
100%, because yeah, sure, okay, you cultured, mammalian cells, but you never worked with this particular HM1 ES cell line. So
mm,
what? If you know roughly aseptic technique, we can definitely show you how to do it, the sort of media to use, the sort of concentrations to use. That's fine. However, if in the soft skills section they ask you, have you ever cultured mammalian cells, and you say not really, that's going to be problematic.
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, you need to show that aptitude for learning, development. And also, what I think they need to see you as a cool person, as someone they would like to work with, go out to pub after work and just a professional and optimistic, enthusiastic person who they would want to work with, spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week with. They need to like you as a person in the first place.
That is actually something I've never considered, but you are right, because yeah, you want to be able to be comfortable with that person, not necessarily as a scientist in
Mm,
the lab. So I think you're definitely right. However, I will say to listeners that being comfortable and completely following the sort of like social guidelines are two different things, because as an example, I don't really like going out to pubs. I'm not a big fan of it. I'm much more of like my hobbies person. That doesn't stop me from socializing with them. I often
mm,
go for a coffee break with them. I often crack jokes in between, meetings, and try to be cheerful and just sort of integrate into the team. But that doesn't mean, on Fridays I have to go out with them. I have my own personal life. So be be a person that can be sociable, but don't lose yourself. I feel like if you're applying for something kind of allows you to grow yourself. Let me put it this way. You can become the best person for the current role, but if you find that you hate the role, then what is the point of that job?
absolutely. But also from the recruiter point of view, from the hiring manager point of view, um, if you don't know how to do 100% of the job, that's okay, we will teach you. But if you are going to cause problems because you're not getting along with your colleagues and you're disturbing their work as well, then that is a major problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my interviews, you know, in general, what I experience is that I would have, an interview with a HR person first, and they would recommend me for an interview with a hiring manager or hiring team. And then later I would have another interview with the hiring manager and the wider team. And this will be a bit more informal interview, and it would be more like, oh, can we have a chat? Do we vibe with each other? Like, are we going to just do well as a co-workers? And I think
Hmm.
that's just really important that they see you as someone they would like to spend 8 hours a day with, essentially.
Our discussion from something else that I realized we never talked about is the sort of also compatibility work together that each company has. What I mean by that is companies often have these sort of underlying questions, like the ethical model that they operate on, the 5 points or the 3 key concepts. And I think when you're applying to a job, try to find what are those hiring rules that they go by. Often companies before the interview will send you the sort of package or a PDF of what we look for in an
Mm,
employee. For example, they will say that we want to do the right thing. It's a classical standard quote, and they will look for those examples. They'll try to find that you adhere to that same rule. It's not saying that you have to do those things that they send out, but as you mentioned, it's the sort of friction points. Both think the company like area and yourself think on those ethical questions the same way, then you will be a match for the company. If you're not, they will probably not hire you. Maybe there's a company out there who needs to work on the cutting edge and super fast. So their main pillar will be how fast can you work? It doesn't mean that you need to work fast, but if you can, you'll be a better match.
absolutely, absolutely. So, okay, altogether, we have soft skills, which are probably the most important. Then we have hard skills or the technical skills, which will be very much role dependent. and I would here expect just technical questions. And when you mentioned personal skills, what did you mean by this, Pat?
So when I meant by personal skills, the sort of question is, how good are you at timekeeping? It's
Right.
not really anything to do with the lab science, because in a laboratory, you don't really need to be attentive to, your watch exactly what's the time,
Mm-hmm.
because you just think, well, you do the science, you progress its milestones, but it's to integrate into the wider team. It's to actually allow you to progress in the career ladder. No, if you are good with time and if you're good with managing many things, then maybe you should have not just one project, but many projects. And maybe your role should go from a scientist to a senior scientist. And it's the sort of personal skills like attentiveness to detail, timekeeping, maybe being positive about mistakes and issues, that sort of things really helps.
Right, I see. Okay. So essentially, they just want to see whether you're organized, you can prioritize work, you can manage your time yourself as well. And these are absolutely key roles. And perhaps whether you can also manage other people if it's needed.
Mm.
Right. So, okay, Pat, altogether, what would be your piece of advice or pieces of advice to anyone thinking of applying for the scientist role? What would you tell them?
So I think the key bit that I would say to them is practice. I know it sounds silly and you might think that that's not necessary, but gather your friends, family. I don't know. If you just need to talk at somebody, just pick up your dog and put it on the sofa and just talk with them, because you need to have that skill set to sharpen it. Because if they will catch you off guard, then the interview won't go well. And the second one I would say is, as you mentioned yourself, follow some sort of a model. Give an example and always go through with a star or a told or any other sort
Mm-hmm.
of answer formatting method. Because if you just say, if I ask you, have you worked on R loops? And you say, yes, well, that doesn't say me anything. But if you say, yes, and I remember back in my day, I worked on this project, there were this problem, I approached it in this method, I learned these techniques, and I then implement them going forward. You just told me a full story, you told me a consecutive sequence of things, hire it done a lot more readily. So I think have a structure and practice. Two things I would say.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, um, you never know what it is that they're looking for when they ask you a question. And they have a whole, list of boxes to tick. So if you give them a story, um, then, you're probably quite likely to at some point hit, the majority of these boxes. You don't know when, because you don't know what
Mm.
they are, but you might. I only would say, on the flip side, you probably don't want to talk for too long about one single story. It needs to be structured and concise. So probably, I don't know what you would, Pat, say, but I would probably say keep it under 3 minutes.
Fully agree with that. I would fully agree. Another thing which just as you were talking popped into my head, some listeners might think that you need to maintain eye contact. That's not going to happen. I know it from experience, because you're being interviewed and the interviewer has to check those boxes. So from time to time, they will look away, they'll scribble something, they might read the next question. No, we are still interested in you. It's just that there's a lot of marks to go through. So don't be afraid if you're talking with nobody particular in the room. That sometimes tends to happen in interviews.
Of course, and also they might have, the camera here as we're speaking, but actually they have another screen there. They see you on the screen there, and then I have a third screen with questions and answers, right? So it might be just like
Yes.
this is what it looks like, and but the eye looking at you is just that you're over there. Um,
You mentioned the screens, and I was just thinking another sort of like soft thing that's just to make interviews more comfortable is, if you're booked for an interview, say for an hour, book yourself just your own personal time afterwards for half an hour just to de-stress, because on one hand, you just need that cup of tea or cup of coffee or just a walk around the house just to relieve the stress, just to get it out of your system. But it often happens that there's also technical issues with interviews. There's often times
Mm,
where, be it Zoom or be it Skype or be it Teams, that there's issues with connecting the microphone or the camera doesn't work. So sometimes the interview might run over just a little bit. And if you can have that extra time, it really helps you shine because it gives you the space to talk. Because if you say that, sorry, I need to run exactly at the hour, then your interview time is effectively cut short.
absolutely. And you know, it is just life. I once had an interview where interviewer's child, just I don't know, maybe 3, 4 year old, ran into the room crying, asking for the parent. And what do you do as an interviewer, as an interviewee? Well, you just let them tend to the child for a few minutes and then they come back. Um, and and I think everyone understands that this might happen. Also that you might have a problem with your internet connection. This happened to me once. We had a problem with internet connection, and we rescheduled, and that was absolutely fine. There was no problem. Um, so I would say, be calm, be relaxed. It's just a conversation. That's really what it is. They just want to get to know you, and also you want to get to know them. What if you don't like them? Do you really want to work for someone who you don't like? Probably not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, funny story from my own PhD interviews when I was applying for PhD places is, as you say, we were trying to set up a Skype interview and it just utterly refused to work. For 20 minutes back and forth, we are trying to hear each other. We couldn't. So in the end, what we decided to do is I quickly gave them my own personal mobile phone number and we just did the interview on the phone. So sometimes you have to be a bit flexible. So don't be afraid if there's technical issues or anything. It doesn't reduce your chance of being hired at all. If anything, it makes me embarrassed when I have, to try to work out the camera and the microphone and I can't be professional.
Oh, absolutely. You know what? I had exactly the same situation when I was still in academia, when I was hiring. Yeah, I had to call someone on the personal phone because unfortunately my internet just wasn't good enough. Um, what kind? So anything might happen, and we just need to be ready and just relax and actually enjoy the process because these are the guys you'll work with. So you do need to have a nice interaction with them. You need to see that you need to see what they're like. They need to see what you're like. And when you're very stressed, they will not even get a chance to see what you are like as a person.
Mm.
Right, Pat. I think we're running out of time. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all of your tips regarding the recruitment and interview for scientist positions. I think that was really, really useful, and you said a few things that I would never think of myself. So thank you for that, and I'm sure it will help a lot of people, to secure, these scientist roles because they do sound great. They sound really interesting, and they're totally worth pursuing. So Pat, again, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you will manage to catch up soon, in real life. Maybe at some point when I come to Cambridge. So
That'd be awesome. And yeah, thank you again for inviting me today. Really happy for these interviews.
thank you. And to everyone else, if you have any questions for Pat, please leave a comment. I'll let Pat know, and we will help you out as much as we can. And as always, if you benefit from this content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel because it just keeps us going and it keeps us motivated. Cheers.